Okay, I'm Brian. We're at Zero Fox Tree Crops. This is our little farm here in the Kootenays, and we grow lots of trees, and we're gonna go look at a bunch today. So yeah, starting at the top, this is the original tree pit where I would store everything over the winter. We've upgraded since then with a shipping container and all that stuff, but I guess the point of what I'm trying to show you guys today is that it's easy to grow a bunch of trees in a small space, and you don't need a bunch of infrastructure to do it. So, you know, the type of nursery we are, I can envision that like across, you know, the country to like get tree crops out to people basically. Work on bioregional genetics, right? Obviously it doesn't have to be at this scale, but we're only on 1.5 acres, so it's cool what you can get done in like a pretty small space. All right, yeah, so the tree hole, right? And it's literally just to keep their roots moist and insulated for the winter. You know, they overwinter really well. If it's not gonna overwinter outside, you probably don't wanna be growing it anyways. So, yeah, I mean, we upgraded just so we could pack orders all winter, but, you know, if you end up like growing out a bunch of nut trees, you just store them in a wood chip hole. You can harvest them up in the fall when it's ready to dig. And then it's like, put them in here, get them ready. So in the spring, you're like, put them out in the field, you have your projects lined up. So yeah, and then let's see where we get the stuff to fill the wood chip hole. And like the background of this field was, this is probably like a strawberry growing field or something like that 100 years ago. Like the Kootenays was like a lot of fruit ranching. So basically people were out here just growing apples, cherries and plums, and I guess small berries. And so this was probably a strawberry field. We found all of the rocks where we decided to do our first like farming, and found out later that the other side of the field has no rocks, but it's cool. We got them all out of there. And so yeah, this is pretty much a hand-powered operation at this point. Yeah, we had a tractor like disc it once. This is like sawdust from like a local mill. You know, there's a bunch of cedar in there. I don't care. We use it in pathways and kind of create a moat around the main field so that like squirrels aren't as brave to run across out of the trees, but they do. And you'll see the protections we put on. The ravens, the squirrels, the little guys they're coming for the seeds. So that was the learning process. We got out here and I didn't know much and I was inspired to grow trees, but like, I think it was this plot that I put all of my first seeds into, and I bought a bunch of seeds online and was just like, oh yeah, you just plant them, it should be fine, right? They said put it in the fall so it can stratify. I learned that much. And then the next spring, I think it was COVID or the year before COVID, and like, I'm out here looking around, I'm like, nothing came up. I think like the Saskatoons, the mulberries came up, and like all these other things I had bought. You know, you just can't like finding the trees. So I took the next year to find all the mother trees, and yeah, growing things from like fresh seed is definitely where it's at. Learning how to do cuttings. We'll get into the cutting section, but this is like my favorite spot because it's like all the different little like mini passion projects you try to start, you know, and then you're like, all right, like I'll table you in the corner, but you know, there's a bunch of medicinal herbs in there, berry bushes, things that I can get cuttings off of. So, you know, had I had a bunch of money to start, I would have just bought all these things from these nurseries, had all these like name cultivars, and we're doing that now. We're building up our like genetic supply. So like these elderberries were like cuttings 2 years ago. And so now we have like our supply of, you know, named elderberry varieties. This is a Bob Gordon. And then we have like a Marge. And so I'm just like filling in the gaps, and we'll cut these back every year and get all the cuttings out of them to send to customers. But, you know, collecting genetics that'll like work well in this region. So, you know, at first like these red currants for someone's backyard, and now I'm buying like the Red Lake red currant and all that kind of fancy stuff. And so this is kind of our holding area for genetics, and yeah, for berries, because like these are going to be producing pretty well this year. You can see like the black currants, and seriously, these were like 10-inch cuttings like only a couple of years ago. So yeah, like this is elderberries and currants, and there's gooseberries in here, and we're hoping to kind of mimic this and expand kind of over where that sawdust pile was, just to keep adding, you know, fancy genetics that work well in Canada, you know, people are like having success with, but also stuff we find in the communities. It doesn't have to have a name. It's easier to, you know, I guess sell to customers if it has a name, but yeah, it's fun to have a place to like collect genetics. So, you know, you have your zone where, you know, you're digging things up, but you're also storing things on site. So, you know, you get one March elderberry bush, and this one bush has enough cuttings to fill out a farm, right? Like there's hundreds of cuttings over the next couple of years. So getting like the genetic stock on site so that you can populate a whole bunch of land, you know, one little piece goes pretty far. And I think that's hopefully the theme of this place, right? Yeah, we'll walk into this field in a little bit. Let's keep going back into the weird medicinal herb plot land. So in the last couple of years, we have been getting into like edible like ground covers, or just medicinal ground covers, just stuff that will like occupy space, stuff that I can get a lot of, you know, genetic material from in a small space. Like this is a 20-foot bed, but it's Chinese artichoke, and they're these funky little mint tubers. Let's see, let's dig one up from a place that we don't want it to be. And they've like deflated now. The time to harvest them is in like the fall through the winter, when late spring, but it's a mint family. It's just got all these little white tubers. So you can see how it's kind of like deflated right now, but these puff up and firm up, and it kind of tastes like a water chestnut. And so it just spreads, right? Like this whole patch was like, I got like 6 of these sent to me in the mail. And then they just kind of spread out a little bit, and then you dig those up and divide it a little bit more, and then all of a sudden you're weeding it out just to stay out of other places. So you can see how it's running out of our like mother bed here, and yeah, we kind of have to like hold it back now, but it's cool. Yeah, we just dig up like half this or maybe the whole thing depending on how much we need, and then repopulate it in like the spring. And so that whole process is identical for ground nuts, and this is Apios americana, like super fun like ground cover, like vining guy. You can see the crowsnut coming in here, but let's see, where's one that's coming up, and we want it out of there so we can dig it up and show you guys. Yeah, where's that guy coming from? And it kind of looks like a string of beads almost. And these just like run along. These are like tiny little guys, but they plump up quite a bit, and they turn into like potatoes. Yeah, here's like a. And so you establish a little colony of these, and then they just start running all over the place. You can make the trellis, but like you don't have to. Put up these so birds didn't run into it. I was worried they would just smack the fence. So you can see it. Yeah, so like this is, you know, like a pack that we'd sell to a customer, and like they can just turn this into a huge spreading space. Same story, right? I had like a handful of these like sent out to me, and then like this has been here for only like 2 years, so they take over space really quick. So that's exciting. And then we're into like the funky berries like aronia. These are guys we started from seed, I think 3 years ago. And so eventually we're collecting our like the Viking and the Nero, like the named cultivars, but this is what we'll do things like softwood propagation with, having these mother plants that grow up like lots of vegetation, and then just, you know, this one bush is 50 cuttings on it, right? So find the good varieties, and then one specimen can give out a lot of material, which is pretty fun. There's remnants of all these medicinal herbs that we had in here. We moved a bunch of them this spring and started kind of a dedicated plot where there's like 25 feet of lobelia, so that we can make room for, yeah, these like fancy guys that we bought, right? That's a pink currant from our friends at Oak Summit Nursery. They're in Manitoba, and they have rad cold hardy stuff. So if you want the super cold hardy stuff, hit up Doug from Oak Summit. And yeah, like, you know, a named sea buckthorn variety. This is a named black currant variety. And so I had, you know, 10 feet, 20 feet of lobelia, and you can dig those up, and like you know, I showed you the ground cover herbs, but these are kind of like the clumpers. And so if we were to dig up this whole guy, we'd end up with this big ball of roots, and then you can cut that up into 4 or 6 and kind of spread out the propagation material. So, you know, super like lung supportive herb, like all these medicinal properties, but it just colonizes space, right? Like you can plant these like with your tree, you know, your larger tree that you plant, and like in that disturbance zone of the meter of a hole you might, you know, disturb and dig up for a little baby tree. I'm popping in like root divisions like the lobelia or a ground cover of the Chinese artichoke, just so it can colonize that space, the grass can't move in. And then you have more yields if you want to harvest it for medicine, or just come through and chop it down. you can kind of see it's like our rhubarb is a chop and drop plant. I mean, we put those in there just to kind of make a wall of green to start, and then we're popping in woody plants that are like living in their shadow. And so you take out the shadow, and what do you get when you take out the shadow? You have all these leaves. And so you just drop those down. It suppresses the weeds. It gets the carbon cycle going. That and all the wood chips. We live on wood chips here. There's not a lot of manure inputs into this place. I mean, I get like truckloads here and there, but you get the wood chip companies, drop them off, and then it's just kind of a, you know, it's like 1 year's of wood chips might rob the soil of the nitrogen that year, but it's going to return it in the following years. So you just kind of like wait a year, and then you'll get that, and then you can add more wood chips and keep it all neutral. And yeah, like woody plants don't like to grow super fast. It's not like growing carrots. So like when they do grow super fast, they end up not lignifying properly. So they don't make the like permanent wood that can survive the super cold winter. So when people buy these like trees from like nurseries that are, you know, 5 feet tall, and they've been like in a pot, so they've definitely been fertilized, and they've grown really quick to get out the showroom, and then they experience major dieback, or they just won't grow for a couple of years because they're like, you know, creating like the proper cell structure, whatever it is. And yeah, you know, a little tree is a mighty tree. It's growing at the pace that it wants to, right? Like you can speed things up. Like that Turkish hazelnut in the corner we'll walk over to later. I did it like 5 years ago, and it was like knee height, and now it's like a 20-foot tree. Like they grow fast. So, you know, patience, and I don't know, in the context of how they like to grow. But yeah, more diversity. This is skullcap, which is another like medicinal ground cover, and they have these, it's another mint family. The mints are really good for this, but they have these like pretty neat yellow roots, and they just spread out. Like that's a skinny one, but yeah, like one root section will come, and that'll, you know, I got like 5 of these over here, and then it carpets it out and covers it. And you can just cut this back, and it'll live every year. You can take a little 1-foot patch, spread it out, or just have like, yeah, that pool that you pull from when you're like planting out your trees in your landscape. And your other permanent woody plants. This is like the ladies' shrine. So Angelica with yarrow, and they're just, yeah, I'm leaving those. Yarrow's another really good ground cover herb, and you know, so many medicine uses, but it's just pretty, and it attracts pollinators like none other. There's something always flowering in here, whether it be like the first couple weeks of spring, or you know, the sylvetta that flowers like well into the fall. So always having something flowering, growing things that don't feed just generalist insects but specialists. And like goldenrod's really good for that. I need to get some more goldenrod in this garden. But yeah, you know, you just want flowering material, and that's what you talk about with insectaries, and getting why are we even going after diversity, right? And this is just random plants I've popped in here, like a boy sea buckthorn, some there's valerians right there, and saskatoons, and we'll propagate out those blackcap raspberries. So lots of kind of random things where I'm like, what do I do with you, catnip? Oh, I'll put you next to their rhubarb. A little couple hascaps in there. This stuff's pretty good. This is the perennial arugula. It's tasty, it's spicy. It's like meadow sweet, queen of the meadow. This is self-heal. And then things like sour cherry. And that sour cherry is going to dominate this corner. But it's just a little wee guy right now. So, you know, we kind of have a haphazard succession plan. It's what I could get my hands on and then afford to put in here. And then you're like, all right, well, I should have done that 5 years ago. Whatever, we're doing it anyways. And it's going to be this tall, but eventually it'll be that tall. And things will have to go, right? Like that cherry tree will certainly create so much shade that some of the plants around here won't like it. That grape will have fun climbing up the fence. And we've changed our fence line so many times around here. It's like always evolving. But plugging in the climbers on the edges of things so that they can climb up. There's like hardy kiwis on that fence and grapes over there. And yeah, things climbing around. Oh, this is an example of the chop and drop. It's like Ella campaign. Big leaves, and we just recently got irrigation in here. We weren't really even irrigating this whole area. So yeah, these will make nice big flowers, and they will anyways, even if we cut most of their leaves off. But to be able to have a density of plant matter that I can just whack down and cover the soil with, because that'll just evaporate in the soil. You know, wood chips disappear way too fast. I'm in there being like, didn't we just wood chip this? Like, where do they all go? And it eats it pretty quick. More like medicinal ground cover stuff. This is Chinese Gromwell. Yeah, things like this is skirt, which is an edible root crop, which is kind of neat. We'll dig that up in the fall and divide it. But yeah, just like stuff we can get a lot of abundance from in a small area, because it translates over to like the homestead, you know, or even just like on a farm scale. Like, you know, you want a high yielding plant that doesn't require a lot of maintenance. And, you know, I blacked out this area with a, you know, sheet of silage, like a silage tarp. And then after that, it's kind of just been wood chips and plant matter, right? Like, you know, you can cardboard out an area and then wood chip that, and then you really have weed suppression. But the closed canopy gardening is kind of like the goal, right? So plug in a bunch of diversity. I mean, not like we didn't start any seeds in here. These are all from like roots or like a bare root plant just kind of popping in, and they spread out. They cover lots of ground. So yeah, now we can go into the nursery space and look at all the little babies. Yeah, totally. All right, let's see how we can get out of here without getting soaked. Ooh, wood betonies. I love this little plant. And this is what I'm saying, like, I don't know if we're even gonna sell the wood betony, but I just wanted to grow a bunch of it because it's like, it's a dope plant. I'm trying to like focus here. Like, we started and I kind of just was like vegetables and herbs and trees, and then the reality hits that you're like running a business and like the inventory was psycho. You'd have small amounts of some things, too much of other things. So trying to find a balance with all this stuff has definitely been the hard one. Like, yeah, it's like you kind of have a come to Jesus moment where you're like, all right, that's it. No more passion projects. I'm going to focus on things that will make me money without compromising my values still. So, I mean, we farm in such a way that it looks super inefficient. Like, most of this is done with buckets. Like, I don't even think I have a working wheelbarrow right now. But this is kind of in the larger, like, can you scale this? Can you replicate this? Is there a lot coming out of a small space? Can I like manage it? So I was like, all right, only things that I can like, you know, profit off of, I guess. But you got to feed the soul too. So you gotta like not compromise if possible. But yeah, it gets overwhelming really quick. There's a lot of plants that you'd want to get into and you're like, I can't grow them all, but I want to. And yeah, we'll go check out the plantings later. This is like a musclewood that my tree mentor guy gave us. And yeah, it's one of those things, like, there's no food value here. There's definitely wildlife value. It's from Ontario. I don't know, it's surrounded in a fence. It's leaving eventually, but it's like one of those things that's just for the soul, you know? All right, this is the main field. And this is kind of what like almost sunk the business at first, because I didn't kill all the grass, and I tried to plant a bunch of stuff in here and it just overwhelmed me. And then I came back and like used silage tarp, killed all the grass off, and then did 4 beds at a time. You know, it'd be like 30 hours of work just to get all the rocks out of like one of these beds. But now they're gone, and we can have like a 12-inch broadfork go through the bed in, you know, a relatively short amount of time. So we just kind of dig them up. It's sandy soil, so they drain really well. We don't get a lot of wind here, so we're cool with raised beds. They don't dry out that much. And yeah, I mean, once we harvest, the field looks like a bomb went off. You know, you're digging out these roots that go down like 1.5 feet sometimes. So it looks pretty messy in the fall, and then we just come back through here and shovel out the pathways, add whatever manure we could scrounge up, and mostly wood chips, and get it ready for the planting. But like, these are all elderberries. We have like a bottom heat bed back home where we like callus them off, but then they come straight out to the field. I know a lot of growers would probably like put them in like little tree pots, and that makes a lot of sense, because like even at this density of spacing, like the roots get wild. It's like a wrestling match to get some of these out of the ground sometimes. But I don't know, that's how they want to grow. And like, the ability for a plant to come back and grow really fast and be a really healthy plant. It's like, it's not the same if it's coming out of a little baby pot. And if I can still do the volume that I want to and not have to have a greenhouse and all these like plastic trays that are, you know, you have to store and make the soil for, right? Like, soil's out here, I can fit 400 plants in one of these beds. So yeah, figure out a way to do it so it's like less work, but maybe it's more work sometimes. I don't know, however you feel about it. But yeah, there's lots of fun stuff around here. So more elderberries. Let's see the grapes starting to finally wake up over there, and the black currants behind those. In the black like shade tunnels are a bunch of grafted stuff. We tried a bunch of grafting this year, which is a big learning curve. It's if you like origami, you'd like grafting. I'm learning the patience for it, so you know, 1 year at a time, right? Yeah, and then like the chestnuts, everything in this field is basically was like put here as a living plant besides the nut trees. So, you know, you have living cuttings, and I don't have to worry about a squirrel stealing that, but we just direct seed, you know, nuts right into the beds, and we had ravens popping them up. Hadn't seen that in 5 years. We've had squirrels steal before, but only like for a small window in the spring, so I don't know, every year is like a challenge. If we were in like the eastern woodlands, we'd have to like fully grow these in like air prune beds, which we're doing some of, certainly for the walnuts. But you know, not being in the native range of these plants allows us to get away with like field planting some until they figure out what you're doing, and then you either move farms or you get some kind of protection to throw on them. So yeah, the chestnuts are doing it. It's just bird netting, hey? And I either put tunnels up and put the netting over that, or I pull this off and kind of pray to the raven spirit to leave them alone for the year. These are all the big air prune beds, and air prune beds are rad for tree growing. They're kind of becoming pretty popular, and basically it's just a raised bed that you build out of lumber, and then I built these mostly out of like pallets as the base, and then this is slab wood from the mill that was just gonna get burnt up. So we cut it up, and there's like this hardware cloth stuff on the bottom that basically allows the root to go straight down, but instead of getting like root bound and circling like it would in a plastic pot, it kind of hits that and just stops and then sends out lateral growth. So like nice like feeder roots, like the fibrous ones. And that allows it to, like I said, not get root bound, but then grow in like a tight spacing. And then I can actually harvest it. Like if I grew these walnuts in these beds, the roots would probably go like 3 feet deep, and we'd be like severing roots, and that's not good. You know, I can definitely get chestnuts out whole. We can get all these other plants out, well, mostly whole. The elderberries like can get damaged, and that's not, they're cool with it. Whereas like you don't want to damage a walnut root. So, you know, we're trying to provide a service that is superior to growing trees in pots, and like I think this is one of the ways to do it, for sure. But you can see like in this English walnut bed, it's again the cover's on for the birds, like how dense a spacing these little guys grow at. And yeah, they'll get like a couple feet tall this year, and the root will be damn near a foot, you know, in length, and they transplant really well. You know, they're like a reasonable size where someone can dig a hole, like a hole that's big enough to accommodate their like roots without, you know, kind of sacrificing any space, breaking their back. And then, you know, we can grow a bunch in a small space, protecting them from the animals. Whoa, dude, look at the snow line. All right, it's June. It snowed last night. That's cool. So yeah, these covers will kind of come off permanently once I think they're big enough where an animal can't like pull it up, like where the root gets big enough, but for now they're just kind of hiding out under here. Yeah. And then these would be like the above ground air prune beds. And yeah, if you're trying to start a bunch of nut trees, like this would be the spot. These don't thaw out, at least in the kootenays, until like the end of April sometimes. Then I have these nuts that are all sprouting. So to solve that, and we're running into our own problems, I built all these air prune beds on the ground. But if they are just on the ground, they'll freeze solid. So we covered them in sawdust and packed it in so these beds don't stay frozen, and we can plant them and put wire mesh on the top to keep the seeds protected over the winter. But then they're where they need to be experiencing like the seasonal temperatures which gives them the stratification they need. They wake up at the proper timing, and that was kind of like the whole strategy behind building all these in-ground air prune beds. But like, you have mice populations build up. You got to make sure they're tight so the mice can't get in. And yeah, it's tricky for sure. But yeah, these are all wild plums, Prunus americana, and this is like the sacrifice plum in a lot of ways, like what you should be growing on the edge of your property. So like, to deter wildlife from coming in to like come after your prize plums. They pollinate your prize plums really well. The fruit's amazing. It's just smaller, but a way more like dependable producer on those years where you're getting like late frosts. Yeah, and it's just a lovely plant. Some of them are purple, cool. So yeah, wild plums, and there's non-king cherries to my left. You are walking in front of a bunch of mulberry cuttings that are just starting to pop up. And if you go out, you're welcome to pull that cloth back. And this was like a bed where the seeds didn't come up, and I was like, what can I put here? So these are grafts. You can see the graft taken right there, which is pretty cool. And then on this side, it's like these buds are just starting to break, which means these mulberry cuttings might take. And I will do a little dance if it works, because like this was a gamble. I was like, all right, if you're experimenting every year, one day I'll be doing this long enough where I won't be like, is it gonna work? And but that's not an RFE. We're always gonna be there for at least a little while. So a lot of this is just kind of like plan it and hold your breath. Is there like, I checked that most of the seeds, they were sound, and then like you look at a bed and if we go over here to the Cornelian cherry bed, there's not one Cornelian cherry in there. And that was after I had stratified them for 2 years because they're double dormant. And it worked the year before. And so it was like, I don't know why it didn't come up, but they didn't come up. So you got to pivot and do it differently next time. And I don't know, maybe it was a problem with the bush. Maybe it was a problem with something I did. Maybe little critters got in there and ate all of them. Like, it's hard to know, but you get one chance a year to try it out, and then you're just doing it over again. And like, maybe a little different, maybe the same if it worked. So that's kind of, this is like the land of trials and errors. But yeah, what I wanted to share, especially like, with all the different places that you check out, is, if you're a small farm, a homestead, like having some of these air prune beds on site is really valuable, because you just have a receiving space for seed that you might come across and like, well, what do I do? I got to put it in the fridge and then like pull it out of the fridge and plant it in these like little pots and then transplant those. It's like, no, you can just have your air prune bed where, it receives the seed, it gets these, the wire mesh put over the top of it, and it lives outside so it hits the stratification properly. But you can see the density that they grow at, right? Like one of these little pallet beds can have a couple hundred trees come out of it. Yeah, and like it's just a nice, and you can put more than one species in there. We can go check out the little handheld ones. These are Korean pines. This is the only evergreen we grow. I definitely am not a great evergreen grower at this time, but yeah, it's an exciting plant. Produces gigantic pine nuts. If like we're forest farming in the Yukon, it'd be like Korean pines and Saskatoons. You'd be off to the races, right? There's always a plant for somewhere. You just, what we fetishize in the permaculture, like movement, like people were like, I want pawpaws, and it's like, yeah, but like maybe autumn olive berries is actually more realistic, and like, oh, but that's invasive. Oh God. So, but yeah, like these are the pawpaws, by the way, right after I was talking shit. So they'll come up in August. Another thing as a grower, I was like, dude, you're just gonna, yeah, you're just August. Whereas the hackberry, also known as the sugarberry tree, it came right up. Good job, guys. Thank you. Doing great. And that's a relative of the elm that doesn't get the Dutch elm disease. So these will be the replacements for all the street trees that we know about. all the different elms out there, and they produce like really tasty edible berry that you know, birds love and humans can eat. Yeah, but you know, raisin tree didn't come up. Okay, stuff didn't come up here. Fill it with, you know, Usurian pear, another extra seed I had. Like, this is the trial and error plot for sure. Yeah, and this is a good example. So you're kind of seeing the different sizes of the air prune beds we do here, and it can be as simple as just like having a box. And this is like a chestnut batch that we grew last year and just didn't harvest because we already had too many chestnuts. But yeah, I mean, it's 8 inches deep, and it has, let's see if you can see the wire cage at the bottom, right? So that's kind of how the roots just hit the ground and stop growing. So these all need to be popped off the ground and put up. So the air, put the air in the air prune bed. But yeah, you know, we were just like going to mills and going to their salvage piles and like getting the offcuts and building these boxes to start. And then we built the big ones that were off the ground, and then these pallet beds. That's pretty cool. You can see the Korean pines just popping out. We seeded these guys. So growing perennials from seed, the big mystery when you do plant them is like, what does the sprout look like? The pines are pretty easy to tell. But like, I know now that this is what a redbud sprout looks like. I didn't know that last year. So some of it's a bit of a, like an experience game. And then you like learn the weeds really well. You're like, okay, that's a red bud, leave that. That's a weed. That's a clover. But awesome, it's been like, oh my God, that's it. And then you're like, no, it's just a clover. And the whole time I thought it was like the awesome tree, and like they didn't come up at all, and it was just clover. Damn. This is the last little expansion plot. And then we'll go look at my random tree plantings in our little plot. So we tilled this up last year, so it's much newer in the soil development game, but it received all of our cuttings last year. So we like overwintered these jostaberries out in the field, and these are all, I mean, you can see them, these will all be like 3-foot plants by the fall. And like in the past, I'd kind of be freaking out because I'd be like, it's June, you guys, it's time to grow. But they're just getting their root structure set up. You know, they're like little cuttings that overwintered out here. And now they're starting to grow, and then they'll just shoot up. This whole place will be covered with green. So yeah, there's hascaps here. And then that far side is all mulberries from either a cold seed source that we ordered from, or super epic tree near Creston that we found, like on the other side of the tracks, like 100-year-old tree. Like 3 of them were like on their side. One was still standing. They were all covered in fruit. Clearly from like some homesteaders from like 100 years ago. So that's kind of like, you know, I'm stoked to grow the cultivar stuff out here, but I mean, part of me just loves finding random old trees that you'd never be able to find out what cultivar it was, but you see, it's just like there's so much like epic energy coming out of it. You're like, I must spread you. So that's what one of those mulberry beds is. And yeah, so that's all the farm plot. But we get into like the funky trees that have no human food value that'll grow anyways. And that's, you know, I told you it's about 1.5 acres. So if one day we have a big old field to be able to plant out rows and do the agroforestry thing, that'd be great. But right now our plantings are just, you know, this lovely tulip tree that has the coolest shaped leaves I've ever seen in my life. And I'm proud, I grew this thing from seed. Go little guy. And there's a bunch of really little guys, right? Like our wannabe pawpaw grove with these like little 1-footers that just got put out here this spring. And like, it's mid-June, these just leafed out. So we have people hit up, be like, I think it's dead. I'm gonna scratch the bark. If it's green, it's probably just sleeping in. Yeah, more pawpaws. You know, the redbud tree, I for sure thought this thing was dead. And like, I have not seen this, so this is like one of those like reveals. Like, look, oh my God, it's waking up. I just saw that for the first time. Go, buddy. Look at the little red, it's a red bud. I get it now, right? This is what happens when you read things in books and you don't have a dedicated mentor being like, don't worry, they'll leaf out in June. It's like, ah, they leafed out in June, okay. This is like a nice shellbark hickory where like this tree's from like the Mississippi River Delta, and you know, there might be some shellbarks in southern Ontario, and you know, it overwintered, it's growing. Will it grow here and produce nuts? Maybe not this season, obviously it's a little guy, but like would this genetic do that here? Well, in 20 years when it actually produces seed finally, we might be hot enough, have enough growing degree days in the summer to like ripen nuts. So that would be pretty exciting. So I don't know, throwing stuff at the wall, checking it out, see if it'll even live and grow. This is a hecan, like a hickory hybrid. And these are like just some random currants that we had left over at the end of the year. So those are Josta berries. And then a nice happy red alder behind it. So this is like a BC plant. And when you think of native plants, right, it's not native to this region, technically, but there are red alder stands in like northern Idaho near Sandpoint that it's, you know, biologists are like, well, how? You know, were they moved by indigenous people? Was it some kind of, you know, it's close enough to the coast and there's enough migratory birds that moved the seed, but this is supposed to only grow on the coast. It grows great out here, fixes nitrogen, grows into a nice tall tree, you know, really good support species. And I mean, I'm not like arguing for like reforestation with it, but to put into like inject into your like, you know, mixed agroforestry planting, like it's a really nice plant. So, and it has like really good lumber value. You plant these super dense and then just thin them out over time, then you have these amazing mushroom logs. You know, the idea is that within 5 years you're growing enough wood material that you could get a log to inoculate. So red alder is something we're trying to figure out how to germinate reliably. We've had super mixed results, but anyways, that's one we started from seed a couple years ago. So it's taken off. And oh, another red bud. Are you waking up too? Yeah, it's waking up too. It looks like a dead stick. And it will be for at least a few more weeks. This is yellow birch. And yeah, the trees, this is what I'm saying about trees growing. Like that thing was giving me, it was like below my knee 2 years ago. And they grow pretty quick. Like, you know, get the mulch on the ground, and you know, we don't even really have a water system over here for this guy, but dump a couple buckets when it gets super dry out, and just keep them to get through the hard times, and then you have a spring like this and they grow a foot really quick. And yeah, more random things. The density in here is way too tight. Like there's a sugar maple to your right, this is a quince right here. And you know, we'll have to cut down this fir tree above it. But right now it's giving it shade like it wants when it's young. So lots of management decisions, and I'd rather be left with too many trees and then have to be like, well, is it going to be the sugar maple or the quince that has to go? And it's, you know, it's a hard choice for sure, but you're kind of hedging your bets, and then you're finding out like what will grow here best for you, because yeah, everybody has the idea of what they want, but the plants will tell you what can be done. You know, you just got to give them a chance to tell you. This is where you're like experimenting with some of these herbs. So we put like bone set there, not oxeye daisy, next to this English walnut. So this single is going to get way taller than this and shade it out, but we'll come through and chop it back and spread it out. And eventually it'll form a big enough clump, and we'll dig it up and turn that into 10 more plants, and maybe we'll add some to this little sequoia, which somehow overwintered. A lot of its brothers and sisters died this winter. This one made it. So the top's browned out, and I was like, is this thing doomed? And no, we got some growth. You're still here. So yeah, one of the biggest trees in the world. Let's go. Yeah, and there's just more random tree plantings, like a white ash. Make baseball bats out of it, but also just like a pretty shade tree. Another tulip tree with some valerian sisters getting its back. And this is like a spot where I want valerian to send seed out and just start popping up meadow-like, because if I can keep filling the gaps in between these plants with other herbaceous plants, maybe berry bushes, things that, you know, we put our overstory in to start just because we, you know, we had them and we were antsy. But like, you know, between that black cherry and that red alder and this tulip tree, that white ash, like it's overplanted with stuff that's going to be 30 plus. But now the opportunity to put in, you know, the mid-level plants, the support plants, you just keep packing it in. You know, I want to be able to walk around here so I can weed whack or whatever, but you know, eventually there'll be so much shade that the grass will kind of be kept at bay, and because we don't have animals that move through the system, it's kind of us to mow the grass. So bring in lots of mulch, get the trees up. Eventually I won't have to mow. That's the goal. I don't want to have to do all that every year. Yeah, and you can tell it's from the coast, this red alder, because she like had some dieback. But I think with the will it grow here question, it's kind of like, well, can you get it through the first like 4 years of its life? And if you can, then it has a strong enough root mass that just makes the tree hardier. So, you know, that could involve mounding a bunch of mulch up over it during its seedling first year, or accepting dieback, knowing things don't have to look perfect if you're trying to grow out of zone. And then, you know, this is a seedling. I put 6 out here, 4 made it, but 2 didn't, and that's just the selection process over time. So, you know, people willing to take chances to find out if things work, and if they don't, then move on to the next or try it again, and you know, get the trials and errors out there, and then we find out what we can get away with, and magic happens, hopefully. Yeah, super stoked on this hackberry. She's going hard. So that'll be hopefully like a big canopy tree eventually, but for now it's just like a little friend. These are our ghetto tree guards that we started using before the fence was all up. We have a friend who has a CNC machine that cuts out snow skates from them for some dude who sells them. And we're like, if we can make that into a tree protector fence. Yeah, it's ugly, but it'll work. So whatever, just screwed it together, put a piece of rebar in to support it, and now it's like this Pacific dogwood's definitely big enough that this thing can come off. Because maybe if a deer got in here in the winter, it would be rubbing on it, but not enough to kill it. And that's kind of what you're looking for, like this maturity. Take the cages off. So yeah, this is our random little food forest planting, random tree planting that we're working with what we got. Yeah, cool, dude. I think that's most of the farm. This is 0 fox tree crops, our 5th year, and a nice hawthorn tree.